At 94 years old, Robert Duvall finally broke his silence. And when he did, he didn't hold back. He named the actors he just couldn't stand, and one of those names shocked everyone in Hollywood. For decades, Duvall built a career as one of America's greatest living actors, a man who never played politics, never pretended to be something he wasn't, and never backed down from speaking his mind. But behind the calm, rugged presence was a fire that few could handle. If you love uncovering the untold stories behind Hollywood's greatest legends, make sure you're subscribed, because this one changes everything you thought you knew about Robert Duvall. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Before the fame, before The Godfather, before the awards and legendary status, Robert Duvall was just another struggling actor trying to find his place in a Hollywood that didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't the typical star, not handsome in the classic sense, not flashy, and definitely not the type to play along with studio games. But that's what made him stand out. Born in San Diego in 1931 and raised in a strict military household, Duvall learned early that discipline and blunt honesty were everything. His father was a Navy admiral, a man who demanded precision, control, and emotional restraint. But young Robert had a different kind of calling. He wanted to tell the truth through characters, not commands. When he arrived in New York in the 1950s to study acting under Sanford Meisner, he wasn't the loudest or the most charming student. But when he stepped on stage, people stopped talking. His approach was raw, unfiltered, and real. He didn't act. He became a character. His breakout came in 1962 when he played Boo Radley in To Kill a Mockingbird. With almost no dialogue, Duvall still managed to make audiences feel every ounce of his character's pain and innocence. It was a quiet kind of brilliance, the kind that Hollywood didn't fully appreciate yet. But while that role made people notice him, it also introduced a trait that would define and sometimes destroy many of his Hollywood relationships: Robert Duvall's refusal to fake anything. He wouldn't flatter directors. He wouldn't play nice just to get a role. And he definitely wouldn't tolerate what he called Hollywood phoniness. That brutal honesty made him respected and feared. But as we'll see, it also made him a few powerful enemies. And one of them, he'd never forgive. As Robert Duvall's reputation grew, so did the stories about his temper and bluntness. Hollywood was full of charmers, people who could smile for the cameras and shake the right hands. But Duvall never learned that language. He said what he thought, when he thought it, no matter who was listening. By the late 1960s and early 70s, he'd worked with some of the biggest names in the industry, but not everyone could handle him. Directors admired his talent, but dreaded his confrontations. Co-stars either respected his discipline or avoided him entirely. People described him as old school, but not in a nostalgic way. On set, he demanded truth, real emotion, no overacting, no fake tears. If someone tried to phone it in, he'd call them out, sometimes in front of everyone. And in an industry built on fragile egos, that kind of honesty didn't make you many friends. It wasn't arrogance. It was obsession. Duvall saw acting as sacred, and he believed anything less than total commitment was an insult to the craft. He often said he'd rather quit Hollywood entirely than play a fake version of himself just to fit in. But that intensity created enemies fast. Rumors started spreading that he was difficult to work with, a label that sticks faster in Hollywood than talent ever does. Still, Duvall didn't care. He wasn't there to make friends. He was there to make art. And soon, that fire inside it would collide headfirst with another Hollywood powerhouse, one who would change his life forever. When The Godfather began filming in the early 1970s, Robert Duvall wasn't just another actor on set. He was part of a revolution. Francis Ford Coppola had a similar cast that would go down in history. Marlon Brando, Al Pacino, James Caan, and Duvall as a cool, calculated consigliere, Tom Hagen. But while audiences saw cinematic perfection, behind the camera the tension was as thick as the smoke in the Corleone family's boardroom. Duvall's performance as Hagen was subtle, layered, and deeply human. He played the role with quiet authority, making every line count. Yet, what fans didn't see was a quiet competition brewing among the actors, especially between Duvall, Pacino, and Caan. Each man wanted to prove he was more than just another player in Brando's shadow. Brando was a god of the set, unpredictable, untouchable, and magnetic, and Duvall admired him deeply. But when it came to professionalism, Duvall had no patience for Brando's constant improvisations and later rivals. According to several people who worked on the film, Duvall believed Brando's genius came with chaos, and chaos to him was the enemy of discipline. Still, the real friction wasn't with Brando. It was with someone else entirely. James Caan, who played Sonny Corleone, was loud, brash, and known for his explosive energy. Duvall was his opposite, calm, precise, controlled. On camera, the contrast made their scenes electric. Off camera, it made them clash. Caan liked to keep things loose and playful between takes, often cracking jokes and teasing castmates. Duvall, meanwhile, wanted focus. He thought too much joking cheapened the work. The tension between them became so noticeable that even Coppola had to step in to cool things down. Still, both men delivered incredible performances, feeding off that unspoken rivalry. But the competitive fire didn't end when The Godfather wrapped. It carried into The Godfather Part 2, and by then, it wasn't just creative tension anymore. Something much deeper and much uglier was brewing. For decades, Robert Duvall carried himself with quiet dignity. He was never one for gossip, never one to start trouble. But when he finally opened up, one name came out sharper than all the rest: Dustin Hoffman. Their story began long before fame, long before Oscars or red carpets. In the early 1960s, Duvall and Hoffman were just two broke actors in New York, sharing a cramped apartment and the same stubborn dream: to make it. They rehearsed lines together, chased auditions, and lived on cheap diner meals. At first, they were brothers in struggle. But Duvall later realized that friendship meant something very different to Hoffman. In interviews, Duvall hinted that Hoffman had a habit of borrowing not money, but ideas. He said, "I'd work for weeks on a scene and suddenly I'd see Dustin use it at his audition, word for word." When Hoffman started landing roles, he'd say Duvall had inspired him. Duvall never forgot that word. "Inspired," he said once, "is just a polite way of saying stolen." Their paths crossed again years later, when both men were being considered for French Connection. Duvall believed it could be the role that changed his career. But according to his version of events, Hoffman went behind his back, telling the director that Duvall was difficult to work with, even uncooperative. The part went to Gene Hackman, and Duvall never forgot. For years afterward, the two men kept up appearances, smiling at events, exchanging polite nods. But underneath, that early betrayal festered. Duvall once said, "There are actors who compete with you, and then there are actors who undermine you." Dustin was the latter. That wound shaped how Duvall handled Hollywood for the rest of his life. He learned to keep his distance, to trust his craft, but not the people around him. And maybe that's why, when he finally spoke about Hoffman, there wasn't anger in his voice, just exhaustion. He said quietly, "Some people never stop taking. They just get better at pretending it's collaboration." That line stunned everyone who heard it, because for the first time, the world realized Robert Duvall wasn't just sharing gossip. He was revealing how Hollywood really works. Robert Duvall never shied away from giving credit where it was due. And when it came to Marlon Brando, he always said Brando changed acting forever. Before him, everyone was performing. Duvall once said, "After him, we started living our roles." But admiration didn't mean friendship. On the set of The Godfather, Duvall saw a side of Brando that the world never saw, the genius who couldn't control his own chaos. While Duvall was known for showing up early, knowing every line, and treating the crew with respect, Brando was a complete opposite. He'd arrive hours late, mumble his dialogue, and demand endless retakes. At first, Duvall thought it was part of Brando's process, that strange method brilliance everyone excused. But soon, it became clear that Brando didn't care about the film or the people making it. In one interview, Duvall recalled, "Marlon was a genius, but he weaponized it. He used his talent to get away with anything." Behind the scenes, Duvall and Brando clashed often. Brando would refuse to rehearse. He'd rewrite lines or disappear for hours, leaving the cast waiting. And while the studio called it artistic freedom, Duvall saw it for what was disrespect. It wasn't about ego for Duvall. It was about commitment. He believed an actor owed something to the story, to the people who showed up every day to make it happen. Watching Brando turn The Godfather into his personal playground made Duvall furious. Still, he never badmouthed Brando publicly, not until years later. When asked in an interview if Brando was the greatest actor he'd ever worked with, Duvall paused and said, "No, he was the most gifted, but greatness takes discipline." It was a subtle jab, but for those who knew Duvall, it spoke volumes. And yet, there was a sadness in his voice when he talked about Brando. He once said, "Marlon could have done anything. He just stopped caring." That's what haunted Duvall, not the ego, not the chaos, but the waste of it all. He'd seen what brilliance could become when it was left unguarded. So when Duvall later said Brando was one of the few actors he couldn't stand, it wasn't hatred, it was heartbreak. Because to Duvall, Brando had every gift an actor could dream of, and he threw it all away. If there was ever a moment when Robert Duvall dropped a calm, composed image the public knew, it was when he talked about Bill Murray. Their tension wasn't born out of decades of rivalry or betrayal. It started and ended with one film, Broken Flowers, 2005. At first, Duvall was excited. Murray had a reputation for being unpredictable but brilliant, a mix of humor and melancholy that could light up a screen. But Duvall quickly realized that what fans loved about Murray's spontaneity made him impossible to work with. In interviews years later, Duvall didn't hold back. He said bluntly, "He's very talented, but he's very difficult. I don't think he respects the work." To Duvall, acting wasn't just showing up and winging it. It was discipline, craft, and preparation, the kind of commitment that came from the stage, not the spotlight. But on set, Murray's laid-back style clashed with Duvall's structure. Crew members recalled moments where Duvall would show up ready to shoot, lines memorized, timing perfect, while Murray improvised, changed direction mid-scene, or refused to rehearse altogether. At one point, Duvall reportedly walked off set after Murray made a sarcastic comment about actors who tried too hard. Duvall shot back, "Trying too hard is how you make it look effortless." The tension never really faded. When the movie wrapped, the two men went their separate ways, and Duvall later said he'd never work with Murray again. Still, Duvall didn't just dismiss him as a bad actor. He made a point that stuck with fans and fellow performers alike. Talent without respect for craft isn't genius. It's laziness dressed up as charm. That one line summed up everything Duvall stood for. To him, Hollywood had become a place where charisma mattered more than commitment, and improvisation replaced preparation. And Bill Murray, whether he meant to or not, represented that shift. So when Duvall listed the actors he couldn't stand, Murray's name didn't appear out of bitterness. It was about something bigger, a generation gap, a moment when the old Hollywood of discipline and method collided with a new Hollywood of spontaneity and irony. And Duvall, ever the purist, wasn't afraid to say it out loud. When people talk about actors Robert Duvall couldn't stand, few expect to hear the name Tom Cruise. After all, they starred together in Days of Thunder, the 1990 racing drama that helped solidify Cruise's place as a superstar. On screen, their chemistry worked. Duvall played Harry Hogg, the seasoned mentor, and Cruise was a reckless young driver learning to grow up. Off-screen, though, things weren't quite as picture-perfect. At first, Duvall admired Cruise's dedication. The younger actor was famously intense, showing up early, memorizing every line, and running through scenes again and again to make them perfect. But as the cameras rolled and Cruise's fame skyrocketed, Duvall began to notice something that bothered him. Tom was playing the role of Tom Cruise. In later interviews, Duvall hinted at it without naming names. He said, "Some actors get so wrapped up in the image that they forget to act. They start performing for the mirror, not the moment." Fans later connected those comments to his time on Days of Thunder. Reports from the set claimed Duvall grew frustrated with Cruise's need to control the creative process, even pushing back against the director and writers to make himself look more heroic on screen. For Duvall, that was everything wrong with modern Hollywood: image over integrity, ego over emotion. He once joked, "When I started, we worked for the story. Now, some work for the poster." It was a quiet jab, but a sharp one. Despite the tension, Duvall never turned the rift into open hostility. He respected Cruise's work ethic. He just didn't respect the brand Cruise had become. And that difference mattered. To Duvall, being an actor wasn't about fame or fanfare. It was about truth, even if it meant being difficult, overlooked, or forgotten. Their professional paths never crossed again after Days of Thunder, and Duvall's rare public comments about Cruise always carried that same bittersweet tone, admiration mixed with disappointment. He saw in Cruise a version of Hollywood's future he didn't want to be part of, shiny, perfect, and completely detached from the raw honesty that had once defined their craft. And while Cruise continued to dominate the box office, Duvall stayed loyal to the kind of films that built him. Quiet, character-driven stories where emotion mattered more than marketing. For fans who followed both, it was fascinating to see the old lion and the new king of Hollywood, divided not by talent, but by philosophy. Out of all the names Robert Duvall mentioned, and the ones he never publicly confirmed, there was one type of actor he couldn't tolerate, the phony. Not the arrogant, not the loud, but the ones who acted like they were acting. To him, that was the ultimate betrayal of the craft. In one interview, Duvall said flatly, "Some actors, you watch them and you see them thinking, 'Look how good I am.' That's when I turn it off." He believed that great acting should never draw attention to itself. It should feel invisible, like you're watching real life unfold. And there was one man in particular who embodied everything Duvall despised about Hollywood's newer generation, Dustin Hoffman. Yes, the same Dustin Hoffman celebrated for Rain Man, The Graduate, and Tootsie. For years, Duvall avoided speaking his name directly, but insiders and film historians piece it together from Duvall's comments about method actors who overdo everything until it's fake. In a 2010 conversation, when asked about Hoffman's style, Duvall reportedly said, "He's too busy showing you how hard he's working. It's acting about acting." That line spread fast across fan circles, and even Hoffman himself heard about it. What made it sting was how Duvall wasn't entirely wrong. Hoffman was famous for his extreme preparation and dramatic intensity on set. He'd stay in character for days, refuse to break between takes, and push co-stars to the edge emotionally. For Duvall, that wasn't dedication. That was ego disguised as art. He once put it this way: Brando lived it, Hoffman performs it. And that single sentence revealed everything about where Duvall drew the line. Still, Duvall didn't hate Hoffman personally. His frustration was with what Hoffman represented. The rise of over-the-top method acting that traded emotional truth for theatrical display. To Duvall, that was like watching the craft he loved being turned into a circus. Even in his later years, when asked about modern performances, Duvall would shake his head and say, "They forgot it's about listening, not showing." That quiet principle separated him from almost everyone else. So while the world celebrated actors who cried the loudest or broke the most on screen, Duvall admired the ones who didn't have to try so hard. The stillness, the silence, the control. That was his truth. That was his art. And it's that exact belief that acting should feel real even when it isn't. That made Duvall one of Hollywood's last true purists. As the years went by, Hollywood changed, but Robert Duvall didn't. While others chased fame, headlines, and awards, he kept chasing truth. To him, acting was never about pretending. It was about being. At 94, when most actors had long stopped caring about old rivalries, Duvall finally spoke freely, not to settle scores, but to remind everyone what mattered. He didn't expose these men out of spite. He exposed them because, in his eyes, the industry had forgotten what honesty looked like. He once said, "You don't have to like me, just tell the truth when you work." That was his final line, quiet, simple, and devastatingly real. And maybe that's why his words hit so hard, because they weren't about hate at all. They were about disappointment. About watching a world he helped build get swallowed by ego and performance. But through it all, Duvall remained the same man who once said no to Hollywood trends and yes to authenticity. The kind of actor who didn't need to shout, cry, or grandstand to make you feel something. He just was. And even now, after all the awards, the legends, and the rivalries, one truth remains. Robert Duvall never wanted to be the most famous. He wanted to be the truest. So, what do you think? Was he right to call out those actors? Or was it just an old man finally saying what everyone else was too scared to? Let's hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more untold stories about Hollywood's greatest legends, hit that subscribe button, because the next one might just change the way you see your favorite stars forever.